Okay. Yeah, so we
Okay.
are missing Bill, and then Bill is excused at, well, he's notified us of his absence. And Carolyn, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Lindsay, I think you're here, but I don't think we need. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, so agenda and materials review. Are there any changes to the agenda that anybody would like to make?
I move that we accept the, oh, no, we don't have to move on the agenda. No, we just move forward. I was waiting for the minutes.
Okay. So we can move to public comment. And there's Michael too. Yeah, it's about time for that. So I don't think there's any public comment. Leah, do you want to do your spiel about raising your hand just in case?
Sure. If anyone of our attendees would like to speak public comment, you may raise your hand. We don't have anybody attending by phone, so I won't go into that whole spiel, but you can raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. So we can give people a few minutes to figure that out. And if there's a technical problem and you can't figure out the raising of the hand, feel free to email our office at policeauditor@eugene-or.gov, and we will get your comments to the CRB members.
Leah, is the chat function open for attendees right now too?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think it is because I can send a note to panelists and attendees in the chat if I want to.
Okay. So that's another
Yes,
way that
panelists
if somebody wanted to give a comment, they could chat also now to raise their hand. But I don't see that. So we can move on to comments from board members and commissioner liaisons. We did hear that Bill would not be here this week, just if anybody missed that. So we are our full board for tonight, and we are a quorum. So comments from board members and community liaisons. Rick, I will start with you. Do you have any comment?
The only comment I have is related to the departure of our Mark Gissinger. I'm very sad to see you go, Mark. I wish you could be around for at least another year or so to see this transition of all the things going on go through. I appreciate your support throughout the years. I think you're a really great asset. We're lucky to have had you here in Eugene.
Thank you. I'm not staying
right.
another year.
Bernadette, do you have any comment?
I have no comment.
Okay, Jose, do you have any comment?
No comment.
Lindsay and then Michael. I should have been doing that the whole time. Lindsay, then Michael, please.
So the ad hoc committee continues to meet, and at the last meeting, we looked at a series of motions that, sorry, I'm trying to keep all my meetings straight. We looked at a series of motions regarding the use of things like tear gas and such. And those motions were moved forward kind of in a block. There were some like very specific language that people wanted to pass along. And yeah, the subcommittees continue to meet and bring back motions to the full committee. So it's kind of where we are now. And I would second everything that Rick said. Mark, it's been a pleasure working with you, and it will be sad to see you go.
Lindsay, did you have anything from Police Commission? I know last month, did you tie those in together and I just missed the transition when you were talking?
No, probably not. You're fine. So at Police Commission, we were also looking at policy changes. I really do need to look at my notes on that. It's been too long and I have forgotten all of the specific details, but I do have notes. So I'll bring them up at the end if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, and then me.
Yeah, so I don't think that I have anything either. I'm as someone who is eagerly looking forward to retirement, I'm actually glad that Mark is taking off and doing what he wants to do.
Michael, were you able to go? Was there a Human Rights Commission meeting?
Oh, yes, there was. I haven't, yeah, and it was interesting. There was they spent a lot of time talking about the ad hoc committee, and more or less the updates from their members sounded like the updates from our members. There's a lot of frustration with the timeline. There's a lot of, although people are glad that it got extended, there's a lot of just frustration over the details of the mandate. I don't have my notes with me, but the details of the mandate and people not knowing exactly what is supposed to be the actionable thing that's going to come out of the committee. Of course, this was last month because they meet the week after us. So that may have all resolved itself by now. I don't know.
All right. The only comment that I have, I thanked Mark last month, so I don't have to do it again tonight. But I wanted to comment personally, and this is, of course, my own opinion, as you know, the whole night is. But there's been a lot in the newspaper in the past week or two about that's been commenting on the role of the CRB, and I just wanted to kind of express my feelings about some of it. I think that being part of the system here in the CRB has showed me a lot about how the system works, the police oversight, and it's actually given me a lot of faith in the system. And I think when the discussion comes up about defunding the police kind of as a national catchphrase, I think one thing that people don't understand in Eugene is that we're already on a very good, I think, successful path to getting the results that a lot of the defund the police, you know, the people who want that, what they're asking for. And I think that if people in Eugene had a better understanding of what we already have here, then I think the conversation would be a lot different than what it currently is, with the oversight and cahoots generally. That's my comment. So we'll do meeting or minutes approval from January meeting. So we got those in the agenda packet this month. Oh, I also want to point out in the chat, Majeska just wanted to congratulate Mark on his retirement and thanks for all the years as auditor. So I think that was a public comment that she didn't want to take the time to do, but it's worth noting. So minutes approval. Are there any?
Thank you.
Are there any adjustments to be made to the minutes from last month?
I would move that we accept the minutes as proposed.
I'll second.
All right, just raise your physical hand if you agree. Okay, that's everybody. So minutes are approved. And the next order of business is elections of liaisons to the Police Commission and the Human Rights Commission. The ad hoc is still Rick and Lindsay, so we don't need to talk about that. But we do need to talk about Police Commission and Human Rights Commission. Right now, Lindsay is our Police Commission liaison and Michael is our Human Rights. Should we start with Police Commission and then move to Human Rights?
Just a reminder, yeah. So the Human Rights Commission doesn't need to be voted on. We just, someone volunteers or is volunteering.
Okay. So then let's do Police Commission first. We can take nominations.
Just a point of clarification. I mean, I think when Michael's saying it doesn't get voted on, it doesn't get voted on by city council, but we would still vote to say that we agree that somebody should be on. I mean, normally it's just whoever volunteers, but I just want to make sure that I understand what we were saying.
Oh, yeah, I was just trying to repeat whatever I remember you saying, Bernadette, last year. So whatever you said is what I'm trying to say.
Right, I think the police commission needs to be approved by the city council
That's
because
correct.
it's a voting member of police commission. With the Human Rights Commission, it isn't, it's the liaison, so. But we do, as a body, have to nominate and get somebody to officially be that person. So let's do police commission first. I don't know, Lindsay, do you want to?
I am no longer interested in serving. No, I am interested in serving. I am overwhelmed by the amount of meetings that I have right now between the ad hoc, trying to keep up with those subcommittees, and then these two. So I would graciously accept anyone else who would like to volunteer. I am tired.
So now we can take nominations for somebody or for self, that's fine too.
Michael, I know that in the past you have been interested in serving. I don't know if you are, but I would be happy to nominate you if that's of interest.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested. I'm not sure if it makes sense, because I will be starting a new job in Texas, in Austin, in the fall. And so because the terms now are all off kilter from the year, I don't know if, I mean, I guess you could just replace me then, but I don't know if that makes sense either. Since it is a position that has to be decided by the city council. I don't know, Leah, do you have an opinion?
I don't think that that's a problem. I mean, I don't like to give council more work in general. But I think it's a pretty small line item on their list. And I think, yeah, I think anyone who's interested, let's talk about that. And I think if you're interested until the fall, that is fine too. We can figure out all the terms as necessary.
Yeah, just to clarify, I am hoping to stay on the CRB next year to fill out my my term. We're waiting to hear back from the city attorney about that. But I wouldn't, and I would come back to Eugene for that, but I'm not going to come back twice a month for 2 meetings. But yeah, so Lindsay, if you want to nominate me, that would be great. I say nominated myself.
So I'll say I nominated Michael.
I'll second the nomination of Michael. Is there anybody else who's interested? All right. Do we need to vote? I guess we do need to vote, right? Do all in favor of Michael becoming the police commissioner liaison? That's a unanimous result. Michael, do you want to also be Human Rights Commission still?
No. I will say the Human Rights Commission is easy lift. You just go and attend the meetings or log in and attend the meetings. You're not a member of the Human Rights Commission. And that said, it can also be a little boring because not very much of it is related to CRB business.
You should have led with the boring and then ended with it's a light load.
But they're like, it tunes you into what's going on with homelessness and in Eugene and all kinds of other things I can't think of right now.
All right. Does anybody feel compelled to volunteer to do this?
I'd like to nominate Jose.
Jose, would you like to accept the nomination?
Gladly.
Wonderful. Then I will second the nomination if you consent to accept. Anybody else? All right, let's vote on that. Is Jose being the new Human Rights Commission? Great. And Leah, you'll get in touch with him about meeting times and how to attend.
Yes, Tuesday of the month.
Did you say first Tuesday?
Third.
Third. Good thing I asked.
Sorry, my
On the
internet.
upside, on the upside, their meetings are shorter than ours.
All right,
That is
thank
new.
you.
Well, no, because I said they were boring, so I had to also say that they're shorter.
That's a good point. Thank you, Michael and Jose, for taking on these roles. It is important and appreciated. We are ahead of schedule and it's time for a case review. So Leah, it is your turn.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best. My internet is not great, but hopefully my children have stopped playing Minecraft. So I'm gonna try to share my screen. You'd think I'd be used to this by now, but no, not quite yet. Oop. All right, believe it or not, we haven't done a normal case summary, case review since like November. So here we go. So the first case started with, there were two sort of flurries of 911 calls regarding a dispute at a residence. Officer B responded to the area following the first call for services, like that, how it got entered into the 911 system. I think there were actually 4 calls, but they're all for one thing. So I hope that makes sense. So Officer B went to the area and one of the calls had said that there was a vehicle that drove off that had one of the involved people. So I think once the officer didn't see or observe the dispute directly, it was cleared as patrol check. And then the second set of calls came in and Officer B responded again with Supervisor A, this time to got out of their cars and went to the residence. Supervisor A, Officer B approached the front door. I should say both of them had their body worn cameras activated. So one of them falls off later, but we'll get to that. So they approached the front door. Supervisor A said something about it sounded like a dispute when that supervisor walked up. Officer B knocked on the door, a voice shouted loudly inside, and the officer sort of backed up quickly. And I call it Citizen 1, but Citizen 1 opened the door, shouting sort of things that I shouldn't say in a public meeting. And then a dog ran out the door. And Supervisor A backed away quickly. The dog sort of followed. Officer A and B are both shouting at the person to get the dog. The person sort of stood on the front step, called to the dog. The dog didn't really respond. And then Officer B states, "What is the matter with you, dude?" And the citizen responded with shouting, "You came to my house." And then it kind of devolved from there, is a shorter way of saying it. B and A continued to issue orders to get the dog. The citizen came out of the house towards the dog, but also towards Officer B. Officer B physically says he was helping, he's trying to help the citizen to get to the dog, but they become entangled and Officer B sort of ends up taking citizen down to the ground, and that's when B's camera comes off. But the audio continues to record. And A's continues to record, so we still have a pretty good visual recording of what happened. B, pretty soon after they're in a physical engagement, sees the knife on the ground and shouts "knife." Supervisor A comes up, is distracted by the dog. It's all kind of hard to explain in a line by line way, but I did my best. And so still shouting to get the dog, Citizen 2 comes to the door. Supervisor A tries to get them to get the dog. A ends up deploying a taser to Citizen 1. Citizen 2 then comes back. Supervisor A pushes Citizen 2 back. Then that person moves to the front door. Supervisor A pulls them back and gets them in handcuffs. And the whole thing happens about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Between Officer B knocking on the front door and both of the citizens ending up in handcuffs on the front lawn. So a use of force report was written by a different supervisor. And then while that was going up the chain of command, it got flagged as something that might be outside of policy. So we watched it and initiated this investigation after we saw the video and the reports. The allegations in there are several. So for Supervisor A, there was de-escalation for not de-escalating, unsatisfactory performance for not identifying themselves. There was some apparent confusion from the citizen about, you came to my house with flashlights and guns and I know who you were. And so that's where that came from. And then the use of force, actually in the physical use of force between Supervisor A and Citizen 2. And then Officer B also had a de-escalation allegation and then a professionalism for saying that, dude, what is wrong with you or similar. And then unsatisfactory performance for the same sort of behavior of resulting in the confusion or the apparent confusion. And then use of force in Officer B's interactions with Citizen 1. So as you all know, we have recommendations from the chain of command and recommendations from our office. I recommended that both de-escalations be sustained for Supervisor A and for Officer B. The chain of command agreed with me on Officer B. Sorry, that's a typo. So for whoever's watching, Officer B is not written correctly here because Officer B's de-escalation was sustained by the Chief of Police and the chain of command. However, the rest of them are correct. Sorry about that. Ultimately, the chain of command and the Chief of Police felt that Supervisor A acted within policy on all counts and that B acted within policy on 2, 3, and 4. And then here are your issues for discussion, but Carolyn, are you drawing on this?
Yeah, I was editing your typo.
Thank you. I did not know that could be a thing. I can go fix it while you guys are talking. So I'll stop sharing so you guys can talk and then I'll fix it for the record.
Thank you. All right.
I was very confused. Thank you for trying to help me.
Sorry, I sit in with my
Teacher should
second
help
grader.
herself.
I'm a Zoom pro because I learned from my second grade child. Okay, so let's do some general case review comments before we get into the discussion topics. So some general ideas. I'm going to use the same order of people, but I'm going to start with a different person like we used to when we were actually at a table. So I'm going to try to do that today. And so I should write that down. I'm going to start with Bernadette this time. And then I will go to Jose.
So I think the first thing that stood out to me was when they approached the door, there wasn't a loud argument going on. It kind of sounded like there was some laughter going on, but certainly nothing that sounded like there was kind of an immediate danger. But I mean, that doesn't negate obviously knocking on the door. But I think what I found interesting is that they were holding the screen open and then they knocked on the door and you immediately hear a dog. And of course, my instinct would be if I hear a dog is to immediately close the screen to make sure that any animal is not going to come barreling out as soon as the door is open. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I don't know, if Jason or anybody wants to address that, if it's, holding the screen door open after you've knocked is just kind of what you do so you can talk to them better. But it kind of just seemed like, and maybe this again is in hindsight, looking at it, it's like, that makes sense. But because everything happened so quickly, it just seemed like that was just one of those pause moments that, gives you an officer the ability to slow things down. And so if the screen door is closed, it's one thing to slow it down. So then when somebody's answering the door, they're not immediately confronted by, who's standing there. And again, the dog wouldn't have been able to come out. It went really fast. And I don't think it needed to. I think with lots of things, it just needs to slow down. And I understand why they felt the need to kind of do some things. But there were other things that putting the hands on him, taking the guy to the ground when the dog was still not under control. It just seems like it's the opposite of what you would want to do if you're really concerned about the dog, because anybody that knows dogs, it's like, that's going to, I would think, trigger more of a reaction from a dog than just standing there talking to the person that, you know, they are there to protect. Although this dog didn't really seem like he was in protection mode. It seemed like he was barking to say, you know, he's there, and then quieted down quite a bit. And so again, I'm not in the situation. So, you know, my watching it after reading it is completely different than actually living it. And I always have to remember that when I watch these things, that, you know, it's different living it. So I appreciated that, you know, there was a review of the video that, you know, that somebody saw this in the chain of command, or, you know, at the police department, and said, somebody needs to review this, that the auditor's office needs to review this. And so I always appreciate those internal checkpoints that that our police department is watching itself and bringing things to the attention of the auditor, and therefore the public, because we are there then seeing these things, and giving us the opportunity to say, yes, we understand what you did, but we think you could have done it better. And so those are my initial thoughts on it.
If I may, I think we opened that, didn't we, Leah? We asked for the video because it just seemed peculiar to us. And so
It's
I don't,
auditor initiated. Yeah.
pardon me, audit, yeah.
Auditor initiated. I think it was kind of a simultaneous sort of, the video was, well, all of this needs to get, but yes, it's auditor initiated.
And unfortunately, we don't yet. I hope we do. When you see it internally generated, I would say at least 50% of those are us, at least. Again, we probably need to do a better job of getting a data set for that to prove my hypothesis.
I can't, if we actually put this in there. We did get a complaint from a friend of the involved citizens after it was already closed. I think we actually got it like 2 weeks ago, but my estimation of time off these days. So, okay.
All right, Jose, and then Lindsay.
I want to say first, or outright, that I'm really glad that I'm really glad that the lieutenant's memorandum to the chief recommended sustained on allegation 1 of Officer B. I think that's the correct assessment of what happened here. I want to say that this to me is like a terror, like a nightmare kind of situation for me. Like, it's dark and there's dogs. That is very scary to me. I'm already like scared enough of dogs, or like apprehensive enough of dogs that I don't know. And so I don't know, when I read this, for some reason, I think I was tired last night and I didn't understand that it was nighttime. So after I saw the video, I was like, whoa, this is different. And the chain of events that center on, you know, my recommendation, or me agreeing with the lieutenant's recommendation, is that this all started at like 1 minute 30 seconds on the 3rd video in the 327 folder. That's the one I'm looking at. And right when involved citizen says, "Is he biting you?" You know, and kind of like it's kind of antagonistic. B says, "Grab your dog or you're going to be under arrest," which perhaps somebody with more experience can tell me whether or not that is, it seemed confusing to me. Like, can somebody be placed under arrest for not getting their dog, you know, under control? But then he looks back at him and he says kind of like, "Oh, you're funny." And that's when officer engages. And it seemed appropriate to say that what I saw on the video, at least to me, was not an attempt to de-escalate, but like, when they arrived, the situation is, extremely, like, folks there are already in some kind of situation, this guy has the right to be angry or whatever emotion he is if officers show up. That is not like grounds for like engaging him, in my view. So that's, yeah, I think that's for me where it centers in on like the like 10, 20 seconds after that minute 30 mark. So yeah.
Okay, Lindsay and then Michael.
Yeah, so I will say reviewing the video was very different than just reading about it. I agree. I am also absolutely terrified of dogs. I don't know. I don't read dogs well, so I always think they're going to attack me. So the presence of the dog was a sort of additional chaotic element. And it did unfold very quickly. It's really hard to tell. Like the file was great. It has so much detail kind of describing what happened, but like, 3 pages of description happened in like a minute. So it was just a very compressed situation with a lot of moving parts. So that struck me as, yeah, sort of viscerally watching it. I just as like a tiny detail, I don't mean to be contrarian. When looking at the adjudication memos, it looks like the lieutenant said it should be within policy, and then the captain said no, that it shouldn't. It should be allegations sustained. So like as it went up, and then the chief concurred with the captain. So like as it went up the chain of command, it changed from within policy to sustained in terms of de-escalation. I thought the captain's memo was good, and I agreed with the reasoning. As much as the initial burst out of the door, I think is how it was described in the reports, right? And the initial burst out of the door from citizen one, and that kind of tense moment and dog barking, and it was very chaotic. It was sort of starting to settle down. The dog had stopped barking and was clearly not being aggressive or biting. Things had slowed down just enough for communication to start happening when the comment, I don't know how else to describe it. It just seemed, the way I would characterize the like, hey dude, what's wrong with you kind of comment, it just struck me as immature. That's the only way I can do. I mean, like, it just seemed, obviously it was unprofessional, but it just seemed immature. So that, I mean, I agreed with the rationale that obviously didn't de-escalate the situation. It escalated the situation, and then it just sort of took a direct line to escalation from there. Yeah, so it was a very, it was also really surprising to me. The officers like literally never identified themselves. Like at a certain point, it became clear to the person that these were police officers, but the person was pretty clearly intoxicated and maybe not tracking super well. They never said who they were or what they were doing there, and that was, I think, kind of compounded some of the initial problems. So that's all I have to say in general comments.
We'll go to Michael and then Rick.
Yeah. So I'm glad that Lindsay brought up the intoxication, because I think that's an important element here. How you and I know that this is in all of the policies, right? That they take into account mental state, level of intoxication, all of that stuff. But someone who is coming out of a heated situation with whatever argument or dispute was happening, they're stressed because their dog is going crazy. That always stresses me out. And then there's these strangers there who are showing up on the scene. I think that it would be, even if they had identified themselves, this person might not have been 100% clear what was going on. So, it's just a difficult situation. It's so many of these cases start out with something that is not, shouldn't lead to anyone having that much worse of a day than they were already having. And, it's a welfare check or it's a dispute, and things just go from bad to worse. And I'm trying to think about why we see this. And obviously it doesn't happen that often, because otherwise we'd see a lot more of these cases. But when it does, I think I want to try and figure out what is the element here that makes things go off the rails. And there were when I was reading the interviews, there's several times throughout the file, it said that the officers were scared or were afraid or were nervous because of the dog, because of the knife, because of different things. And so there's a lot of fear here. And, my mom used to have like 2 dogs, and then our dog was staying with her for a little bit, and there was another dog there. So 4 of these very small dogs, and some of them barked, others didn't bark at all. Our neighbor came over to visit her. This was after my dad died. And he walks into the house. He's a big, barreling, former mill worker kind of guy. And he does not get along with my mom at all. But he comes in, he's trying to be very nice. And the dogs surround him and like start barking at him. And they will not leave him alone until he leaves the house. And I can only think that that's because they smelled something that my mom was giving off, some kind of chemical or pheromone or something that told the dogs that she felt threatened, that he was in the house, subconsciously. And so the dogs responded by basically harassing him out of the house. The way to calm, as Bernadette was saying, the way to calm down a dog is not to tase its owner. It is also not to be confrontational. That's, I'm sympathetic to Jose not being a dog person. I got a very bad bite when I was 3 and had to have stitches, but I've learned to love them, and they're so nice if you just love them back. So it's unfortunate that this incident ended up going the way it did. We don't know what the criminal charges are against the people, right? So we don't know if those were things that would have happened anyway, or if those are also stemming from all of this. But it just seems like we need better ways to prevent what's supposed to be an emergency response from making things worse. I think I'll just leave it at that for the opening comments.
All right, thanks, Michael. Rick, and then I will give my comments.
I will go along with the recommendations and the adjudication that's taken place already. I do have a couple of issues, however. I agree with Lindsay that this happened extremely fast. The officers' ears were pinned back by the explosion out of the house, by the individual and by the dog. And I have also been bitten by a large Doberman similar to a pit bull. And it's a very frightening experience, and one that scares you. What you had here was a citizen who was extremely intoxicated, who was armed with a 13-inch knife with 6.5 inches of it was blade. It was a scary weapon. The problem with looking at these cases is that it's easy to judge in the light of after effects or hindsight and make conclusions about maybe what should have been done. I would ask that any of you who have an idea about what should have been done, what the officer should have done to just de-escalate, I'd be happy to hear it, because I can't think of anything right now. Something that would have worked.
I don't know that I have anything to add in the general. I appreciate all of what everybody said, and I think my comments fit more clearly in the next part. But I did want to circle back because Jose, I think you were asking about policy or about practice with arresting if you can't control a dog. So I don't know if Jason, are you able to comment on that? You remember that question? If you're there.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I might have missed it.
Jose, do you want to repeat it?
Yeah. Thank you. The transcript reads that officer said, grab your dog or you're going to be under arrest, okay? While physically directing involved citizen one toward the dog, grab your dog. Okay, first question. I think I have two questions. First question, is that a kind of like, is that an actual command, or is that language a kind of like filler, like that one says in the moment? And can you be arrested? Second question, can you be arrested for not grabbing your dog? Like if this person didn't follow that command, could they be arrested as a consequence of it?
Yeah, the whether or not they could be arrested and charged is a legal question. I don't know if I'm comfortable exactly if it would be interfering with police if you refuse to obey a lawful order. Whether or not to get your dog is a lawful order, I'm not sure. I'd have to do a little bit of research. As far as your first question, I think it is kind of a stand-in thing to say. I think he could have detained him for officer safety, which would have meant him going into handcuffs. And maybe it was shorthand to say you're going to be arrested rather than I'm going to detain you. But I'm not sure. It's not clear to me that there's a crime being committed right there at the time. But I think the officer does have a reason to put the guy in handcuffs if he's not cooperating. And this is a rapidly evolving kind of situation with a lot of moving parts.
I realize there's excuse me. That's a tricky question. And that I'm asking it in good faith. So thank you for responding in kind.
You're welcome.
All right, so we're going to follow the same order, but we're going to start with Jose with comments on complaint intake classification, investigation, and monitoring. So we'll go Jose, then Lindsay.
I'm not sure I have any comments. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have any comments on that, on this topic.
Lindsay, then Michael.
So I always appreciate the thoroughness of the investigations. Also like the summaries that are put together. So I always read I read through all the materials first and then I watch the videos. And I find the characterization and representation of things as they're written down in our reports to be very consistent with what I feel like I watch on the video. So I appreciate that. For whatever it's worth, if anyone from the ad hoc committee is watching, I mean, this is something that I've said many times. I don't have concerns with the quality of the investigations. I think they're very thorough. When I look through them, I find them to be very transparent. I find all of the information that I'm looking for, even some of the information I don't care about, but then I get to decide, whether it's something that I think is pertinent or not and disregard it if it's not important to me, but it's that thorough. So I just wanted to kind of underline that's nothing new. I've never, in all of the cases that I've reviewed, ever seen one that I didn't think was investigated or presented to us in an unsatisfactory way. I can say before we had body cam footage, there were many times when I wish we had footage or that type of thing. But with what we have, I've always been very satisfied, and this is no exception.
Okay, Michael, then Rick, and then me, and then Bernadette.
Yeah, so excuse me. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say either. I will second Lindsay's compliments about the the thoroughness of the investigation write-up. Yeah. I did like the, I don't know if this was a new thing in Gareth's writing up, but the use of concerned citizen 1 and concerned citizen 2, I just found that easier to follow than I think the all the complainants and respondents and different other language that crops up just gets me confused. But I know what a concerned citizen is, so that was nice.
I think that was Vicky, because Vicky does the redacting. So I see.
Yay, Vicky.
Okay, Rick, and then me, and then Bernadette.
I'd like to reiterate the compliments to Sergeant Barrett on the investigation. Part of the fantasy about police policy and oversight in Eugene that's going on in the ad hoc committee right now is that you have police officers looking at police officers and not criticizing them when they should be criticized. And I don't think that's the case here. I think that what we have here is that the Internal Affairs Department does a very good job of being fair, complete, and transparent. And I'd just like to state that for the record.
I completely agree, Rick. I think that that's important to keep repeating, and I appreciate you and Lindsay doing your best at the ad hoc to continue doing that. Another thing, I think it's thorough and like everyone else said, but I also appreciate how quickly it was. I think it was about 2 months from the event to when adjudications are dated. And I always like to see that, because seeing these cases that can go on for months and even years, it makes it hard for the officer to recall what happened. And I appreciate the timeliness of it. Bernadette.
I agree with what's been said, especially how Lindsay phrased it all in relationship to the ad hoc committee, which I'm not there, I haven't been watching them. But it reminds me that I was on the board once before, about the time that Mark came, so many years ago, 2009, was it, Mark? Is that when you came? 2009, okay, that's 9 fingers. And so I had the, I'm not sure it was a privilege, I had the, I saw reports that were done by the previous auditor. And so I saw IAs that were done under the direction of the previous auditor. And I can tell you that the internal affairs reports that were done then were just as excellent as the ones that are done now. What I have seen a shift in is the analysis in reviewing what the officers did, whether they, how the adjudication came about. I think in the beginning, when internal affairs did it, it was, they did their reports. They were always, very well done. But I don't think the chain of command necessarily knew exactly how to write up the adjudications as well as they do now. The analysis that goes into whether or not the report that's written by IA, whether it should be sustained or whether it's within policy, I think that's the biggest shift that I have seen over the years. And I have to say that the analysis, not just by the auditor's office, I mean, I think that they're able to give us, really clear analysis as to why something's within policy or why something should be sustained. But in having those conversations with the police department and the chain of command, I've seen a shift in their ability to sift out and make, I think, better decisions, not ones that we necessarily always agree with, but I think they're better able to substantiate a position rather than there's just not enough here to make it a violation. I think now it's like they look at it and they're really able to say, here's why we think it's within policy. And then that allows the auditor to look back and say, well, no, here's why it's not within policy. And so and then we as a board have the benefit of looking at that and kind of making our decisions. And I think that's what is so great about the process that we now have in place. That, you know, we have seen that growth of the police department in being able to review things and understand how you need to analyze it. And Rick said something in the first part about, you know, that, you know, what would we have done differently? And I think I was trying to say that it's like, it's hard in the moment to think how you would do something differently, especially since we haven't had the training, we haven't had the experience to know that. But that's also what we expect officers to actually be able to, in that moment, be able to slow down in a way that you and I wouldn't be able to slow down in, especially, you know, for people, you know, that have fear of dogs. You know, it's like, we wouldn't expect a citizen who has a fear of dog to really be able to stop and decipher, is this dog charging me because he wants to say hello or because he's attacking me? But officers, you know, they do have to do that. And so I think for me, it was the speed of this and the need for those pauses to be put in there is where my concern was. But I completely agree with what Rick was saying, is that, you know, what would you have done to have them de-escalate? I get what you're saying with that, but I think what I want is I want them to slow down and think a little bit. And, you know, sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. I think in this situation, it was possible. But I think the analysis that went into it from the auditor's office, I think is correct. And I think the investigation was well done. That's all.
All right. We will move on to EPD policies, practices, and training. Mark?
Well, I don't know if this is the right injection point for it, but staying on Rick's point is, first of all, Eugene probably has one of the most rigid de-escalation policies in the nation. There's not a court in the land that has ruled that an officer is wrong if they don't de-escalate when force used, then the arrest used is lawful. So I think we should be pleased that we have a very rigid de-escalation policy, started with Chief Kearns and started with Chief Skinner. And this was a case, you know, obviously maybe it's why part of the reason I need to retire, that really shocked me, because what I was defaulting with, like when so many people see a cop car driving fast, the default seems to be in Eugene that they're hot rodding, and the default for me is like they're going to an emergency and they don't want the bad people to know that they're coming. But the default for me was the neighbor might be like just upset that they're partying and they're too loud, and the only way I'm going to get call the officers or get the police there is by saying that there's some sort of violence that's going on. And if you recall, there was one drive by a previous call by, I think, the supervisor, and he never even stopped or anything like that. So for me, the default is going to the complainant's house first and finding out, okay, exactly what you hear, what did you do? And then the second default is not pounding on the door like I'm some sort of, you know, home invasion robbery person, and certainly having safety in mind, as Rick said, when the weapon was found later, as we saw from the 2 FBI agents down in Miami, having some safety perimeters. But it just seemed like, you know, and if someone's pounding at my door at 12:30 in the morning, I'm not sure that would be the approach that I would take. But certainly I would have a very reactionary approach to that approach by the officers. So that was sort of my default in that case, and why we wanted to look at that. To me, de-escalation is an awful lot about strategy and training. And when we made it a policy, and they made it a policy, I think it's very, very helpful. So that was just sort of why we opened that case too. I was just alarmed by how the officers fed into the tone of the person as he answered the door. And you know, as they said, gave contradictory instructions, you know, get your dog, but we're going to arrest you. And so as the guy's going to get his dog, then suddenly he gets put in the handcuffs. So I have a 12.5-year-old dog, and he's got arthritis and he can't hear, and he would have reacted in the exact same way because he would have heard the pounding on the door like that. So that's sort of the perspective we had when we opened the case, is maybe an expectation of a kinder, gentle, I'm struggling with my L's, approach in this particular situation that we certainly did not see.
All right, thanks for the insight, Mark. Lindsay, do you want to start us off with EPD policies, practices, and training?
So I'll say, I think some of my comments will pertain a little bit to something that's coming up in the next case, but I'll just say it here too, since I think de-escalation is something we're talking about. I hope that we start to seriously think about how to get beyond thinking or trying to quantify de-escalation in terms of the numbers of hours of training that people get, and start thinking of it in terms of a metric for success, and start thinking about how we would measure that and how we would recruit, retain, and promote people who have demonstrated skills in de-escalation. Training is important and it's easy to quantify. You can say, you know, every officer is given X number of hours of training of de-escalation, but we all know that training or input is not the same as output or outcome. And I think if de-escalation is something that can be very good for officer well-being, can be very good for community outcomes, that it should be something that we systematically try to evaluate and reward in terms of, you know, human resources management. So like I said, it'll come up again in the next one, but I haven't ever received a satisfactory answer as to what are our metrics of success. How do we evaluate people? How do we promote people that systematically embody not just the not just people who've received the trainings, people who are demonstrating skill and acumen at the things that matter, you know, to the organization and to the community. So de-escalation is one of those things for me. Thank you.
I just put the turn order in the chat, so if people want to pay attention to that, so I don't have to keep saying whose turn it is, but next is Michael and then Rick.
Thank you. I will probably forget to keep looking at that, so sorry in advance. But I did remember I was after Lindsay this time. Sorry, now I lost track of policies. So I'm on the same page with Mark as far as the de-escalation goes. In fact, I was just talking about this in my class last week, and I essentially said that, you know, de-escalation is sort of a soft policy. It's not a requirement. It's something that is considered best practice, but, you know, because of the totality of the circumstances, because of what seems reasonable, right? It's not something that you can really quantify. So I'm pleasantly surprised that this was sustained and happy at that. I think that I would like to hear more about the de-escalation policy at some point, though, because I feel like I was told, or I heard, and I don't know if it was at this group or if it was at a police commission meeting that I was listening to, but I feel like I was told somewhere along the line that it's not really something that someone can be faulted for not de-escalating, and yeah, so maybe we could just, I don't know if right now is the appropriate time for that, but maybe in the future, because it does seem like an unusually imprecise idea. And so, and like Lindsay, I think that there ought to be better ways to measure it than hours of training. You know, the university does the same thing with everything from sexual harassment trainings to diversity to whatever ethics. We're all supposed to attend these little workshops, and then we know that we are good. And that's not how life works. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not an organizational management kind of person, but I'm sure that someone is and can tell us how to do that. I think that's all I got for this part.
I agree with the adjudications. The language in the de-escalation policy is that officers should make every reasonable effort to de-escalate confrontations to prevent the need to use force. The reason that the language reasonable efforts is in there is so that they're not held to a strict liability standard, so that if they've exercised some efforts and it can be later said that a reasonable officer under the same or similar circumstances would have reacted similarly, then they meet the standard. And I agree with Mark that that is a pretty stringent standard as far as requiring de-escalation. You couldn't make it any stricter, because every cop walking down the street, if he ever was involved in force, would be in violation of the policy and be subject to discipline, which I don't think we want. I think we want the standard of reasonableness in there, which is something that courts use all the time in dealing with human behavior. And so I agree with the policy as it exists. I do have a question about whether or not there could have been anything that would have been done that would have made a difference in the outcome of this case. But I will go along with the adjudication.
All right, I think in terms of policy and trainings, I think that I'm going to kind of quote Leah in her, it is Leah, right? It was your adjudication, yes. That my expectation under this, I'm quoting now, my expectation under this policy is that officers can bring rationality to conversations where the person being contacted may not be capable of doing the same. And I would never recommend that officers be required to continue de-escalation tactics when it is not safe for them to do so. And that the investigation does not show that that was the case here. I think that's important for this one and the other case we're going to talk about tonight, because of the state of the involved citizens and their cognitive levels at the point of interaction. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, that an officer needs to be the bigger person when they interact with people a lot of times, and they need to not fall to the level of the people that they're interacting with, especially when they're in an altered state. They need to bring rationality to the situation. Another thing that has to do with policy and training is, I, as always, appreciate the body camera. I think that is a very helpful thing to have for us to see. Again, I was disappointed with the muting of the body cams when they were talking after it all happened. And it was especially disappointing to me because I felt like we are starting to hear the rationale of why the officers did what they did. They were kind of in a conversation and they were saying, it was Officer B was talking about why they were feeling I guess the dog and the situation was so aggressive. And I think that it would have been helpful for me, and I assume for Jason and all the other people investigating, to have heard that that night rather than having to wait for the interview. And I know that isn't necessarily our role, but I would kind of advocate for that, for the role of the Jason or whoever is doing the investigating. And that's all for me.
I think the only thing I would add is that when we talk about policies and training, I remember an officer telling me years ago that if they pulled somebody over and the person smelled of intoxicants, they would always call another officer out to do a DUI investigation, because no matter what they did, it ended in a fight. And so that self-awareness of the officer to recognize that for whatever reason, people driving drunk don't get along with me, and so I need to bring somebody else in to handle it. I mean, they could deal with drunks at concerts and other places and it was fine, and they didn't get in fights, but for whatever reason, they couldn't figure out what it was that triggered a fight in those situations during a DUI investigation. But having that awareness of what they were good at and what they weren't good at is a skill that many of us, you know, aspire to. Sometimes we figure that out about ourselves and sometimes we don't. And so I think, you know, when it comes to policies, practices, and trainings, I think sometimes it's having somebody be self-aware of what it was, and having that reflection of what they could have done differently. I mean, we can sit here all day long and talk about how this could have been done differently. But unless the people that were there think it could have been done differently or see in themselves that they could have done it differently, it kind of doesn't matter what, in some ways, what we think could have made it go differently. And so I think most of the officers, I think when they, you know, the ones that have come and watched us over the years and listened to what we have to say, have always come away, felt like what we have said has been insightful for them. And I think that they were self-reflective. And so I think we just have to, you know, hope that there is that self-reflection. And because, like you say, Lindsay, training is not a numerical training. You know, there's some people that could have 2 hours of training and get it right away, and others that could have 20 hours of training and just not get it, because for lots of different reasons. And so I don't think this is really an issue of policies, practices, and trainings. It's just a reflective thing that may or may not happen, but I like to think will happen. Jose?
Thank you. On page 22 of 27, in Officer B's interview, in the third paragraph, about 7 lines up, Officer B says, he identified that I had a gun and that I had a flashlight. So to say that he didn't see my silver badge, which is up right on my chest that I was wearing, to not see my police uniform, which I was wearing, he knew I was a police officer. This line right here is what's important to me. The opportunity to de-escalate was basically giving him those commands to get his dog. I don't want to disagree with Officer B's experience here. I want to say that perhaps the opportunity to de-escalate could have been practiced earlier in a more mundane and interpersonal way. Now, cognitive overload happens to us when too many stimuli demand our attention at the same time. So it's hard to imagine how demanding that officers act with more rationality when they're experiencing cognitive overload. It's hard for me to imagine that as a realistic request, because it's not a request that I myself can fulfill. When I'm experiencing cognitive overload, I'm not acting rationally. It's all semi-consciously. So with that in mind, I want to say I don't want to focus on what Officer B should or shouldn't have done, but what we can do in the future to help officers like that, or in those situations, do something differently. So I do believe that de-escalation can be modeled and practiced as long as we have a shared understanding of what de-escalation is. It sounds like, as I hear us talking and other folks around Eugene talking, we don't have a shared, de-escalation is not a shared value. That's okay. But I think we should do some more. I don't know if it's not this committee's work to do that, but like collectively across committees, we have some work to do on developing and defining what that is so that we all have an agreement. And when we see it, we can be like, okay, like eye test wise, that was it or that wasn't it. We need to have some kind of like rubric, right? So I just like to throw this request out into the ether. And I know it sounds kind of woo woo, but like in 2021, after experiencing a lot, I feel I'm feeling that way right now. Okay, so this is what this all leads up to, and I'm really sorry for the big windup. When the officer says, "What's the matter with you?" That's very different than if the officer were to say, "Are you okay?" And I know I'm going to unfairly generalize from my own experience that when somebody says, "What's the matter with you?" like that way, I don't want to respond. I want to respond in kind. And I want to underscore yet again, I don't fault the officer for saying that in that way. I fault us for not having, say, a script for an officer to follow in that moment. Now, I know asking officers to follow a script is weird and can get very prescriptive and can be unhelpful, but it could be, like I said, I think de-escalation could be practiced in a mundane way as these, as these encounters develop. So teaching officers or asking officers to do something like that, it's about making it a habit, cultivating habits differently, cultivating these interactions with people differently. It's a really small one. I don't think that it's going to prevent him from being drunk or from doing any of the other things that it's not going to magically make that person be less angry and scared, right? That he didn't know who was there. It could, however, be a demonstrated countable effort, right? To me, that's something like if we teach our officers to develop the habit of saying, "Are you okay?" rather than "What's the matter with you?" or anything else that just could fire off in their minds in those situations, as we, again, our bodies happen when we have cognitive overload. I think teaching folks to have certain kinds of script that we all, or that the department, maybe I should have enough say on that. The department agrees is like a good de-escalation script. It could be a way where it's not a permanent thing that could help us begin to change habits. And because I'm like a pseudo philosopher, I think that it's possible to change human behavior if you develop habits consciously. Thank you.
All right, Leah. Oh, is she frozen? We see you now. You're good now.
Okay, I'm gonna stop my video. Hopefully you guys can hear me better. Wave your hands wildly if you can't. So Michael brought up the issue of de-escalating and whether or not you can sort of be in trouble for not de-escalating, right? So I think something that might just quickly help with that is, one is in the policy it says should, so sometimes it can be a hard standard to hold to, but it's more that like Mark was talking about earlier, in the court system, that is not a thing that courts look at. The legal standard for police action it doesn't weigh de-escalation currently. So I think maybe that's where that issue comes in, where the policy, EPD has a policy that says you should do this. So in this case and in the next case, it has come up where it's something that you need to be doing. And then Rick point out, what could have been done, and Jose is talking about habits, and I really like that conversation. And I had a lot of conversations with the lieutenant about this case, like a lot. And one of the things that I kept coming back to is, you know, all I wanted was a pause. All I wanted was just a pause, just to take in what's going on. And, you know, it's tough because we don't know that would have changed anything. We don't know that the result would have been different. And so I kind of come back to a different legal standard, which is, you know, when you see it. And for me, when I look at this, I mean, it's not a good standard. I don't like that standard. Rick and I can have a lawyer conversation about that standard, but
Supreme Court says you can recognize when you see it.
that's right. Yeah. So I think for this, I looked at this and I knew it wasn't what I wanted to see. And the same with the next case. You know, I look at it and I know that's not de-escalation. That's not the standard that I want. So that's all I wanted to say. I'll stop cutting you guys off now.
Okay, Michael, do you want to start us off on adjudication recommendations, and then you can add what you wanted to add before
Sure.
you get going?
Yeah, so I had messaged Carolyn that I remembered something, and now I also have things to say in response to things that Jose and Leah said. But so I had meant to mention before, in the de-escalation policy, so it says, there's a long list of several lists actually of things that officers can do that would qualify as tactical, that would qualify as de-escalation techniques and tactics, but they're not limited to this list. And so I guess my first question would be, so the big issue here, right? The call was originally in relation to a disturbance. The officer B came by at, I want to say 10:20, and things seemed okay. And then there was another call at 10:33, right? So not very long after. And then they come back and what we know happens. The dog, so there's no one's in imminent, doesn't appear to be in imminent danger, right? There's not a crazy person waving gun around, or nothing is sort of urgently happening, except for the dog, right? The dog is the sort of stress catalyst in this moment. And people get dogs specifically to guard and bark, and right, that's one reason people get dogs. And so I'm wondering, since there wasn't an imminent threat, would withdrawing a bit have been a tactic that would have been, even though it's not listed explicitly, could have been seen as a possible response, right? Just taking steps back, step back to the street, out of the dog's territory, and then you can identify yourself, and then you can ask the gentleman concerned citizen 1 to join you in the street. Right, there might be another way to handle that wouldn't involve yelling and tasing and wrestling, but just stepping back, because there's not an imminent threat. So I'll just put that out there. And actually, maybe Sergeant Barrett, would you mind say, is that sort of tactic one that is sort of included commonly as an understood?
We can't hear you, Jason.
Yeah, your yellow border lit up, but
Yeah, and you're not muted, but we can't hear you. I'm gonna let him try to work on that. I will say, in a lot of the conversations I've had with EPD mostly over the years, a tactical pause is something that we've talked about a lot. And so when I hear you say withdraw, I think that's kind of what I'm picturing, is just maybe not giving up ground, maybe giving up ground, but just breathing, you know, so I hope that Jason can weigh in on that. I'm gonna give him a second again.
I am back now. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I don't know what happened. I'm sorry. So typically speaking, like I was saying, I don't know how much you heard me before, my computer cut out. When we go to disputes, the dog is not our main concern. Our main concern is the safety of the folks inside. So typically, once we make contact, we would not withdraw. Worst case scenario, somebody would be injured inside, and now the person who's injured them knows that the police are there and has the ability to get back in there to them. That's another reason we wouldn't typically shut the screen door, like Bernadette mentioned earlier, just because in the event that something happens where we need to prop that door open or take immediate effect, we don't want a barrier in there. That's not to say it couldn't have been effective in this scenario, but typically when we go to domestic violence, withdrawal is not really what we aim to do. We aim to control the situation as quickly as reasonably as possible, just for the safety of everybody involved. But that's not to say that, you know, every situation is the same or that that couldn't have been helpful in this case.
Thank you. That makes sense. This is why I'm not a cop, because I probably wouldn't be very good at it. So that takes us on to
Adjudication
Yes.
recommendations.
yes.
Lindsay-
Actually,
Lindsay-
I was
Just a second, Michael. Lindsay said that she has a question for Jason. Does that fit in now better than adjudication?
No, I can wait. That's okay.
Okay.
I just, it's not related to adjudication, but I do have a question for Jason, but there's no reason. Continue on, Michael.
Okay, sorry, Michael.
Well, so my other then comment in response to the comments from Leah, I was wondering, and Jose, I'm wondering if so I also don't really like the, you know, when you see it standard, and I think that my favorite legal scholar is Patricia Williams, who has a book called The Alchemy of Race and Rights, and she tells this anecdote of this woman and a small child walking down. This boy is terrified. The child is terrified of this dog, and the mother looks at the boy and says, "No, it's just a little dog. You shouldn't be. It's not a danger to you." And Williams points out that what the mother's not doing is seeing the dog from the perspective of the child, right? Who's about the same size as the dog. And I think what looks reasonable to me might not look reasonable to Rick. What looks reasonable to Rick might not look reasonable to me. And I know that lawyers have to, and judges have to live in that world and have to make those decisions. But I just think that it's so, well, also I'm not a lawyer, is that it just doesn't seem to me like that is the best way to put all this on. I'm also wondering if we don't have a really clear sense of what de-escalation is, does that mean that what does it mean in terms of this is probably out of all of our expertise, but what does that mean for discipline being overturned on union appeals? Because I know as a union activist at the university, and we had our first bargaining session today, right? If something's not in the contract, it's very hard for management to enforce that against us. Or sorry, if it's, you know what I'm saying. So what I'm wondering is if this de-escalation thing is something that hasn't really been enforced, or hasn't been something that people have been required to do in a hard sense, and then it begins to be introduced, it seems likely to me that that'll face a lot of resistance. I'll say Mark unmuted himself.
Just briefly to answer Michael's question, it's very rare that a discipline at EPD moves out of the step. There's this documented counseling on down, there's no appeal process. And anything above that, which starts with an oral reprimand and above written reprimand, suspension and termination or demotion, are all capable of going all the way to the arbitration step. There's very few cases that I can remember over 12 years that have gone to the arbitration step, either through negotiation or whatever. So they kind of have a progressive disciplinary process, and I think that certainly Chief Skinner is more rigid about that, perhaps, but it's very, very rare that something goes all the way to arbitration here. And I can think of one case, and Leah knows which one I'm talking about. And so I would think, boy, in my 12 years here, if it was 5 or less, that's the number I'd put it at. But again, I could be wrong, and that's just talking about uniform employees, because I think that there's there's efforts to negotiate as well. So all those things, you're in the union bargain, the bargaining area, so you would understand. But it's pretty rare for something to move to that next step, because they have that default of documented counseling that they use often.
Thank you. That, yeah, it sounds like they have fewer grievances than we do at the university. I think we usually go to arbitration about once a year. So thank you. And as far as adjudication, I agree with the auditor. Let me see, where was the difference between the auditor and the, that was around de-escalation for Supervisor A, is that right? Yes, I see nods.
Yes, so I recommend that didn't happen.
So I would agree. So with the auditor on that. I do think that I'm glad to see that things like professionalism get brought up, but it always, I don't know, when someone says, although I take Jose's point as well about this, but when someone says, what was it? What's wrong with you, dude? I can't remember. I'm not gonna find it now. I don't know. It's dark. It's stressful. There's a lot going on. But I see lots of inappropriate things all the time too. So it feels almost like I always feel a little bit like that, like it's overcharging when I see something like a professionalism allegation for something like that I don't see as necessarily right as important as de-escalation or some of the other things. If it's that language was seen to be contributing to escalating, then I would group it under de-escalation rather than under professionalism. But I'll stop.
I've already preempted my announcement about my feeling about the adjudication. I think it was within limits, and I think they did a good job on it. I think that it's been mentioned earlier that all we needed was a pause, maybe give it an opportunity to develop. In a domestic violence situation, let's assume that the officers said, okay, let's stand back here and let this guy stand at his door and yell obscenities to us and let his dog come out and chase us. In the meantime, as we know now, there was another individual in the house. There's another man in the house that came out after the officers called out to him, after they got everything settled down. If the woman was assaulted while we're taking a pause, the first thing that would happen would be a lawsuit would be filed against the city of Eugene for failure to go in there and exercise reasonable care and protect the victim of the domestic violence. And the officer who decided to pause would be on the witness stand, and the cross-examining plaintiff's lawyer would say, "Why did you wait so long before you went in and allow this woman to get hurt?" And the officer would say, "Well, I was exercising de-escalation." And the plaintiff's attorney would say, "Well, is de-escalation more important than this woman's life?" And I think you'd have a few jurors on the jury panel looking at the woman sitting at counsel table as the plaintiff and feel sorry for her and want to award damages to her. And so that's the kind of microscope you put an officer in this type of situation, where you say that in a domestic relations situation, you must arrest somebody. It heightens everybody's attention and causes them to believe that there's something going on here that we have to protect because society says that we're supposed to do that. And that's the reason I have difficulty accepting that almost in every case, someone can say, "Let's just pause."
That's a well taken point, and it reminded me, Rick, of some arguments that people have had about sending cahoots to a call like this, and how that isn't an appropriate thing, because I think one of the officers in their interview talked about how they tend to be, the domestic calls tend to be the most violent or most dangerous for officers. And I think on the surface, it seems like, sure, like a therapist would be a good person or social worker, but I think you're right that an officer is the right tool in this situation. That's just responding to what you said, not about allegation recommendations or adjudication recommendations. I agree. I think that I agree with the auditor for office or supervisor A, that should have been sustained for de-escalation. And I agree that the de-escalation for officer B should also be sustained. And I think that I appreciated that professionalism was thrown in the mix and it was discussed. But I do think that a lot of the things that, professionalism, unsatisfactory, and use of force, maybe not, well, yeah, all three, the root of the things that went wrong with those, I think, do go back to de-escalation. So I appreciate that de-escalation was sustained. If only one thing was going to be sustained, I think that that's a good one, because it encompasses the entire everything. Echoing what's the matter with you, dude, that was unprofessional, but I think it did more in terms of escalate rather than de-escalate.
I agree with what you said, Rick, and I understand Leah's position as it comes to Supervisor A and de-escalation. I think why I would not sustain against the supervisor, however, is because I don't think there was an opportunity for the supervisor to de-escalate. I think at the moment that Officer B did not de-escalate and put hands on so quickly, there was no opportunity for the supervisor, I think, to de-escalate the situation. And I mean, I get the comment about, Rick, what you're saying with regards to taking a pause. And I think there are certainly different kinds of pauses. There's pauses that, are, yes, you stop and you think and you slow everything down. But I think sometimes it's like, it's just a breath and thinking about what you're going to say. And in this case, not saying, what's wrong with you, dude, as the guy is, there. I think it's that momentary, thoughtfulness into the words that you're using that, maybe it's not even really a pause in the moment. It's a pause before you even get out of the car as to what you're about to see, and remembering that it's like having that professionalism as you walk up and having those conversations and trying to keep it calm in a situation that's going to probably be rather hectic, as they normally are. I agree with the adjudications that were put forth at the end.
I'll try to say two things very quickly and then make my suggestion. The first one is that my comment with regard to my comment with regard to de-escalation was within the context of when citizen is already outside and when officer engaged after citizen antagonized him. And at that point, it didn't appear to me like he had the opportunity to harm the person inside. I think approaching this person in a tense situation without matching their energy is the definition of de-escalation. Look, we all, I think we could all agree that words have the ability to make material changes in the world, right? Like words excite. We have an awareness of hate speech. I know this is woo-woo. I live in Eugene, Oregon now, though. Why can't we have something like help speech? Words excite and words can de-escalate. That's what they're arguing about in the Senate right now. If there was a correlation between what 45 said and what happened after that. It's that's what so I understand this in the sense that it's possible to see professionalism and de-escalation as part of the same thing or grounded in the same thing. And, I'm not going to over determine whether or not simply saying, are you okay, would totally change the scenario. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try necessarily. So, I guess that's my recommendation, is that maybe we can have people script to the point that it becomes, part of their software, so to speak, so that in these situations, instead of glitching out towards violence, they're glitching out towards something else. Because what we know is that put under these situations, human bodies will revert to not to reason all the time. And I'm saying this as somebody who rarely reverts to reason when I'm escalated. So yeah, I agree. I recommend sustained. Yeah, thank you.
I think that means, is it back to me? Is that right? So my first question for Jason, I'll do this here just because I think this will work here. It was clear in the interviews, everybody called attention, or both officers called attention to domestic dispute or domestic violence calls being very dangerous. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. It's outside of my experience. And so I was wondering if you can help me understand why those calls would make officers nervous.
Sure. I think I haven't looked at the statistics in recent years, but I know when I was a younger cop and we were being trained in that kind of stuff, we learned that domestic violence situations are some of the most dangerous calls we'll go to. Statistically, there's more officers attacked and injured or killed in these because we're going into an unknown situation that's already got heightened emotions involved. There's always unknown weapons, be it kitchen knives or firearms or whatever, inside somebody's house. And a lot of times you don't even know who, and I use air quotes, the bad guy is going to be, because you could be arresting the male half for beating up the female, and then the female attacks you because she doesn't want you to take her boyfriend or husband away. So there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of heightened emotions that go along with those calls. And we have had them in Eugene where they have turned into homicides when we get there, at least one that I can think of. So that does happen, and it's a trend where a lot of officers are injured or killed responding to these kind of things.
Thank you. That's helpful for me to understand a little bit more about the headspace of the officers. They both commented on it, so it seemed like it must be sort of common knowledge or something that officers know and understand that I don't. So thank you.
Yeah, it's true. When they voice that's an opinion I share with them too. I've gone to my fair share of disputes, and they're always kind of a heightened. You never know what you're going to get into when you go in there, so you kind of got to be ready for anything.
Thank you. yeah, I could even tell in some of the interviews, discussing like, why you would maybe keep the door ajar, why you would maybe put your foot in the door to prevent why you would want someone not to go back inside the house. There was a lot of thinking that was going into it that definitely wouldn't have occurred to me not being a person trained to do that job. So thank you for clarifying. I agree with Bernadette's reasoning. I agree with the adjudication, the auditor's adjudication, Leah's adjudication, that Officer B should, that the de-escalation should have been sustained. I agree with that. But I also agree with Bernadette's reasoning that Officer A was not in a position to do much once Officer B had got the party started and things were escalating. I can't really come up with a scenario where I think Officer A could have done something different at that point. And I don't know if Officer A could have done anything different, since it seemed like Officer B was sort of taking the lead on the call. I don't know what the technical term is, but seemed to be the one who was sort of driving the sequence of events. And so yeah, so in that case, I guess I agree with the chief's adjudication, but I agree with Leah's adjudication about Officer B. I don't know if this is like terribly appropriate, but I am going to say that noting that involved officers are going to or are on SWAT gives me great concern, because SWAT doesn't have body cameras, and the behavior I witnessed was not something I'm super thrilled about. Again, we think about the people we want to promote, retain, recruit. I want more, and so I'm concerned about that. Anyway, for what it's worth. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the first case.
Can I say, oh, sorry, can I say one more thing that's like not about the adjudication or like whatever? Is that okay? I did want to say, so we spend a lot of time talking about the things we don't like to see, and there are always things that I see in these videos sort of incidentally that I also do want to see, so I want to give a little bit of airtime to that. I thought the officer caregiving of the involved child, who was unfortunately present and awake for all of this, what I would imagine could be a terribly scary situation. An officer was assigned to be with the child, was playing with the child, was keeping them calm, and the care that they took to try to find a relative or friend, so that the child wouldn't have to be taken by DHS. Like there was significant caregiving, I think, for that child, which I was touched by that in the midst of all this chaos. I appreciated that. There was also an officer, and there were a lot of officers at the scene by the end, and so I didn't track this down, and so maybe I'll comb through it later. But there was an officer who was joking around with the first citizen who was arrested, the one who came bursting out of the door at the beginning, when reading that person their rights, that really calmed that citizen down a lot, just by talking to him and joking around with them. And like, that officer was there reading this person, right? The person was in custody, he's not happy about it, but managed somehow to connect with this person. And I thought that was pretty impressive. Just, I don't know. That was more of an example of like how, like something that I was impressed by. So there were things done, I think, out of care and that extended some humanity that I appreciated and that I saw on the videos, aside from what we were specifically looking at. So thanks.
Thank you. And the auditor's office does take those kind of comments, so it's good to notice those. Let's do a quick break, 5 minutes. So come back at 7:20. Oh, 23. My clock just turned over. 7:23.
Come back, everyone.
It is time.
It is time.
Time.
Whosoever, wait, where's Lindsay? Lindsay, are you back?
I did some quick research while we were away,
Oh,
and
no.
domestic violence calls are dangerous. But the most dangerous type of call is serving warrants.
Oh, yeah.
When you control for the amount of times they do that versus,
That is interesting. Lindsay, there you are. Okay, everyone who got Carolyn's email before the meeting, this is your sign. Now is the moment. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Did you think I was gonna sleep through the second half? Is that why you did it before the end?
No, this just made sense in the time.
Leah, did you screenshot
Nice.
that?
Thank
Oh
you.
my gosh, I totally forgot to screenshot it. Do it again,
Okay,
guys.
do it again. Do it again.
Sorry. My skills there are not good. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thanks, guys.
All right, we are running out of time.
Thanks.
Maybe we can all agree to have short closing comments and maybe a short final auditor report so we can get through this case. Not to cut you off, Mark, on your last time, but you'll be back, I'm sure. But let's get straight to the second case, Leah, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Sherry. The other case. All right. Case 2. A was dispatched to I'm gonna turn off my video, sorry. Okay, sorry. Supervisor A was dispatched to a large party where there was no social distancing or wearing of masks, and this was in November. So there was one attendee who had a plastic bottle with green liquid inside. That person was initially argumentative, but left. And then a short time later, on the sidewalk, distance away, like a ways away from Supervisor A, and just started shouting to go away, go away. And Supervisor A approached the person, started to ask about what was in the bottle. They said it was an energy drink. Supervisor A reached out to grab the bottle. Person pulled the bottle away, tried to walk away. Supervisor A said that there was PC for a crime and reached out again. And then the person was ultimately taken to the ground by another officer, placed in handcuffs. A crowd gathered during the incident. And other officers had to provide security to get that person to the patrol car. And this was an internally reported complaint. So the allegations were in regards to judgment and de-escalation, just judgment overall between the supervisor interacted with this person, how they did, and then de-escalation for not de-escalating. And all of them were recommended to be sustained, and there was agreement with our office in the chain of command. And here are your issues. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you. Let's start with general comments, and we'll do the same order. So it is Rick's turn to begin.
I think my overall comment is the officer could have let this guy walk away without engaging. It looked like he almost was felt challenged by the fellow and had to make contact with him. It was interesting to note that there was another individual who was asked just to drop his beer and leave. And there's a little bit of a difference because the guy did drop his beer, and maybe the officer could have asked him to pour out the green liquid, the miso or whatever it was, Mio Energy. But it just seemed under the circumstances that it was unnecessary to go after the fellow. That was my gut feeling about it. I have some comments about the complaint, but That's all.
I agree. Being a middle school teacher, I see this kind of behavior all the time, and you have to just choose not to engage. And this officer was clearly being baited, and they made a really bad decision, bad judgment, horrible judgment. They approached the person where if they had just ignored them, the person would have gotten bored and left. So that's oh, one more thing, not connected to the actual case, but I was really happy with the interactions between the officers and the public generally. I think that they respected the students and they had a lot of really good, I think, productive conversations, especially given the kind of attitude that the college students tended to have toward the officers when they began the conversation. I think that it was a really good interaction, and I hope that it helped some of those college students regain a little bit of trust in the system. I say that except for I really did not like it when Officer A to the two young women, started listing all of the force that they could have used when they're saying that, like, oh no, this, I could have done so much worse. I thought that was unprofessional and inappropriate and unhelpful.
I should start by saying that I know this officer years and years and years ago, socialized with this officer back in a previous life when I had a real job. And so just putting that out there so everybody knows that we're supposed to do that, right? I think what's interesting about this one as opposed to the other one is this one did take more time. And the tone used definitely was a tone that I think we would think to be used in de-escalation, if that makes sense. But yet, even using a tone and a slower approach doesn't necessarily get us to the point of de-escalation. And I think that's kind of what's interesting about, I was like reluctant to say, let's do 2 de-escalation cases in one night. I mean, what are we going to talk about, But I think it just shows us that, de-escalation doesn't fit into a nice little box to be able to say that it's like, they should have done this, because I think in this case, they did do some of the things that we thought in the last case they should have done. But clearly, we're still here in a situation where an officer is being alleged to have not de-escalated, and it's sustained. And so I think that's what's kind of interesting about it, is that, we could look in lots and lots of situations and say that de-escalation, they didn't do it. And I think sometimes it's like, we need to remember that there were an awful lot of cases that have been de-escalated that we never see. And so that's my takeaway from this, is it's like, no matter how much we want them to de-escalate, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And unfortunately, we get to see all sorts of things. That would be to Jose now.
Thank you. I think what was persuasive to me was the police auditor's memorandum to Chief Skinner, particularly the section at the end, the latter 3 paragraphs, the second from the last paragraph. I'm concerned with officers' assertion that they could not recall receiving training on application of the de-escalation policy. De-escalation is not a new concept. That's what pushed me over the edge here. And I agree in the paragraph after this that officer did not, quote, attempt to slow down or stabilize the situation despite it being apparently safe and feasible in the circumstances. It just wasn't within the public's interest. The crime was not commensurate with the use of force here. So yeah, this one is a bit more cut and dry for me.
I appreciate everyone else's comments. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I also appreciate people's comments. I would say this is the opening round still, right? So I think that the thing that strikes me as really different about this case is that they're students, right? And they're not. They're of a particular socioeconomic status. They're associated with a particular institution in this town. I'll often tell people I've never gotten a traffic ticket in a city that I was a professor in, because the first question I get asked when I pulled over or one of the first questions is, what do I do for a living? And I say, well, I'm a professor at the University of Oregon or Binghamton University or wherever. And somehow that has resulted in never getting a ticket. So I think that there's, we call it implicit bias in often, that we interact with people who we perceive as, more reasonable, or even when they're drunk, or at least of being more, as fitting into respectability in a different way, even when they're drunk and breaking the law. And there's not a good solution for that. Again, we can train, we can do all these things, we can be aware, but it's still going to happen. Especially implicit bias, especially happens when we're rushed or under pressure. So I'll just throw that out there. I think that they are both cases where de-escalation was not practiced to the extent that it could have been. I think that there were different levels of potential threat in the two cases as well, but yeah, I'll stop talking.
I think that's to Rick and then Carolyn.
I think. Yes, and Rick started.
I
You
started.
started it? Okay, sorry, I lost track of the order. So now we're on to complaint intake classification, and I will begin this one. I agreed, and I again appreciate how thorough and speedy this one was. This one was incredibly quick. So well done on that, team investigators. Jason, mostly.
Sorry, that's me. Yeah, nothing to add to the complaint intake, classification, investigation, or monitoring.
Is that me now? Okay. I forgot to mention this last time, so I also would like to express gratitude for the efforts that Jason put forward here. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too. You're just gonna get nothing but nothing but praise on this. Thanks for your continued good efforts.
Michael, then Rick, anything to add?
Are we back to me again?
Yeah.
That went fast because I got kicked out of the room. So are we on adjudication? No.
Still intake, classification, and monitoring.
Okay. Didn't I go already?
You went on your general.
Oh, God. Okay. It's hard for me to keep track. I think that was my my intake and classification as well. I don't have anything to say there.
Rick, do you want to finish this one out?
No, I don't have anything to comment.
Okay. So then we're back to Bernadette starting with EPD policies, practices, and training.
I got nothing to say that wasn't said the last time. Jose,
Seconded.
Get me now.
Yeah, Lindsay, then
Okay.
Mike.
Yeah, so we've seen this officer many times, and again with the inputs and the outputs, right? At a certain point, no amount of training is going to change the outputs. And at that point is when I become incredibly frustrated at this whole process. So I would just like to reiterate that I think measuring the outcomes is more important than measuring the inputs in terms of things like training for de-escalation and many other things. But that's all. Thanks.
So I do think that there's I want to come back to the training a little bit. That I think that there's there's so many things that I can't do, but one of them is I cannot aim a gun, like even when I'm not under stress. So it's clear to me that learning to aim a gun with some accuracy while you're under a lot of stress is something that people can learn. I can't learn it, but other people can. So I do think that it's possible to, as Jose was saying, to learn a script, right? That your first impulse under stress is to escalate, to lose your temper, to lose your patience, to react quickly without thinking. I think it's possible to unlearn that in the same way that it's possible to learn to aim under extreme pressure. So yeah, I think I don't know how to do that. But I think that it is, it's something that is worth.
I don't have anything to add.
I also do not have anything to add. We've covered it very well. So Jose, adjudication recommendations.
Just say sustained. Do you want me to be specific?
Just if you agree with the adjudication.
I do.
Lindsay.
Yeah, I also agree with the adjudication. Thank you.
Michael.
Ditto.
I agree. I think I'm a little bit stronger on the judgment issue than I am on the de-escalation, because I don't think you can blame this officer for what the other officer did when he grabbed him. I think the judgment was involved when he made the decision to walk down the street and confront the fellow. And again, like I said before, I just don't think that was, in the situation they were in, I don't think it was a good use of judgment.
I agree.
I agree. I have nothing else to add to that.
All right, any other closing comments on this case before we move on to auditor report?
I just like to say that the amount of patience that those officers showed that group of intoxicated, unmasked individuals in the middle of a pandemic was amazing to me. I would have lost my mind a lot earlier. I think that everything they were trying to do, not just from, I mean, obviously the public safety standard of, a bunch of students drinking, as they're always trying to protect, the public from those kids walking out in the middle of traffic, getting behind the wheel of a car, but then you've got the unmasked element of it, of what's going on and the gathering. And like I said, I mean, I liked the patience that they showed in having the conversation with them, and as much as I the patience that those students showed in actually having conversations. I was a little bit amazed because I've seen so many of them just get, completely riled and agitated and stuff. So I just think it was interesting how much patience was going around that day, except for the person that decided to walk down the street and have a conversation with somebody they shouldn't have. That's all. Thanks.
All right. Anything else before auditor?
I have one thing. I thought that the officer, if the officer deserved discipline, he faced it when he had to listen to those students in their staccato method of questioning him, all at the same time, all with a shrieking voice, very difficult to understand and very difficult to respond to. I thought he did a good job of that part of it.
I had a totally different experience with that same clip of video. I totally loved the college girls and thought, my goodness, we're in good hands in the future. For some reason, I found them very endearing, but maybe that's just me. I think they didn't know what to do with themselves, but they knew they wanted to get their questions answered, and they were persistent in a way that I sort of appreciated. And I thought to myself, I hope they go to law school and refine their presence, maybe. But anyway,
I
liked
the
them.
exact. I completely agree with Lindsay. I felt
Sign
like,
that they had been drinking as much as the others.
Oh, absolutely. But they still persisted in their questions.
no, I thought that there was a moment that like law school popped into their heads when they're like, I could do this. So I liked them too. On that note, auditor report.
All right, last one. I'll be quick, I hope. It was previously mentioned, there were a couple editorials, and I did let council know. I think the first one, I think it's something that officers need to be mindful of is the first one was an individual who writes a column once a month who was talking about an experience from 1 or 2 decades ago and how impactful that was. And I hope that leadership pushes down to their officers how impactful these contacts are with police. I've had more than 5, less than a dozen. I can remember every one of them, and I think only in 1 or 2 cases did I feel like the officer was professional and kind and courteous, a la Chris Kilcullen, as opposed to being aggressive and overboard for a rather trivial type thing. So I think we need to be mindful of that. The second one had a lot of, well, not a lot, some factual inaccuracies. And I even, asked the reporter who did the story on me on Saturday, is like, do you fact check these editorials before you actually write them? For example, there was discipline in the case that the person talked about and said that there was no discipline. And it's really regrettable that not that I'm sure the leadership's all that great or the readership is all that great anymore, because only a few people actually saw the article that I wrote or that was written for me, the second one. And so I did let council know where the factual inaccuracies occurred, because ultimately they're going to have to make decisions on the recommendations that come before them. And I'll certainly get my opportunity to talk about those things. With regard to, I think, the investigation part and the IA part that's also linked to that committee is IA here just does a fact-based thing. Most IAs actually do a recommendation that comes out of the IA office as to whether or not there should be a sustained finding or not. So I think that's a little bit different here. And I don't think people understand that. There's 2 members of the ad hoc committee, I won't mention any names, that have probably seen 30 to 50 cases. And there's nobody else that has seen any of these cases except maybe one person who's seen a few. And so when you want to make recommendations about things or want to change things, it would be helpful if you had some sort of knowledge foundation with which to do that. And of course, the state of Oregon doesn't allow that to happen either. And so it makes it far more difficult. But I know there are two people, and I'm looking at two of them that have at least a factual basis in terms of how the investigations are done and whether that they're done well or not. And so I do appreciate that. I don't know how much I'll talk, but I'll be the subject matter expert for the investigations and prosecution piece, independent investigations and prosecution piece of the ad hoc subcommittee on February 18th. I also wanted to point out, I think, which wasn't pointed out in an article, since I got here, and I think Cindy Coleman would probably disagree with me to some degree, what the exact number is. My number's 21. That's the number of people that have been gotten rid of in the 12 years or so that I've been here, either resigned or retired, facing discipline, or were fired. And I don't think many people know that number. Cindy may say it's around 19, but I'm sticking to 21. And so again, it's something the public doesn't know because of the restrictions of the Oregon Public Records Law. Although it's better now in terms of DPSST reporting those kinds of things. I thought it was a nice article that the woman wrote for me. And that worked out pretty well. Other than that, in the famous words, retiring during the pandemic sucks. I think in the famous words of Red Buttons, I never got a dinner. And Dean the Basset Hound, who turned 6 this month, Dean got a dinner. I never got a dinner. And so I never got to send off with my friends and everyone else. And you all are my friends now. And it's going to be nice to just be a regular guy instead of the police officer. I think the vast majority of Eugene police officers do a great job. I'm so blessed to have had the privilege of working with Leah and Vicky and Beatrice, and those are the people that I'm gonna miss the most. But again, it's certainly the time. There's a certain shelf life to this. I think that my shelf life expiration date is getting pretty close, and I need to take care of some other things. So there'll be continued discussions and things like that. And I appreciate the work Rick and Lindsay are doing, because in essence, when the vast majority of the discussion is about the oversight process and the investigative process, you two are the only ones that have any knowledge base to make those kinds of recommendations and assistance to counsel in understanding things. I can tell you there are at least 4 cities in the queue, and that's just because it's the only ones I can think of off the moment, that want to do exactly what we're doing and want to hear from me about how we're doing it. And this is in addition to some other cities that have already done that. So I think we do really well. But again, I've always said since day one, our Achilles heel is the Oregon exemptions and public records. And I think it's the same burden actually that California has as well. And so people don't know what they don't know. So they just want change for the sake of change. I almost forgot, there's probably only one person who's made more of these meetings than I have, and that's Majeska. And in a town that uses the word sustain and sustainability more than any place I've ever heard in around the world, her sustainability in following the work of this review board is really admirable and appreciated. And thanks for keeping us on our toes and for being here for like every meeting that we've ever had. And so I want to salute you for that. Cindy Coleman, fabulous work she does every day. Great work from Jason and everybody else. So again, thank you so much. And maybe after this is all over, maybe I'll get a dinner.
You're getting a dinner, Mark. You just have to come back for it.
All right. I agree. We should have dinner. You should at least come to one of our meetings and have dinner with us at some point. if we're ever doing that again. Closing comments. I will start and I will say that I have none.
Right, I saved it all up for the last meeting and this meeting. Mark Gissner, it has been a pleasure working with you. I can still remember the first case that you brought before the review board, and I'm like, who is this guy? He's not from around here. But apparently we've grown on you, and you've grown on us, and I always appreciated that you kept in touch with me and asked me to think about coming back after some absence from the board, because I think it's good work. The work that you were doing was great, and Leah was doing, and of course with Vicki and Beatrice, it was good work being done. And so to be able to come back and be a part of it again has been absolutely a pleasure. And now that you're leaving, I think that means it's time for me to leave again. I was waiting for that one. So yes, I wish you all the best. And when we have that dinner, it will definitely be on you at the most expensive steakhouse in Florida.
Thank you.
I think people can just jump in if they have a closing comment.
No, let's go on.
Thanks for your service, Mark.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
I'm just gonna say real quickly that, Mark, we are gonna force you to have a staff meeting so we can all do our own goodbyes. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, Mark.
Bye, bye, y'all. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right. I think we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, Mark. We will see you soon in the attendees list, I'm sure. All right, our next meeting is March 9th. We will see you all then. Not for Mark.
Thank you, Mark.